the most wonderful time of the year. We'll go bobbing for apples and dress up as monsters and have a good scare. Hello Organauts, and look at this. Our regular podcast schedule coincides with none other than Halloween night. So, get Big Light turned off and sit by the glow of your recently carved pumpkins. You can't see me, but for the duration of this episode, I'll be holding a torch under my chin. We can't ignore the fact that we've got an episode on the spookiest night of the year, so we're going to have to face our fears and get scary. And what's scarier than a bit of admin? Don't worry, I'll do this quick. Off the Rails podcast goes out on Spotify, Amazon Music, YouTube, and maybe Castbox, though I'm not sure if I've set things up correctly on that platform. I'm on YouTube, TikTok, and Twitch, and you can email offrailgamer@gmail.com if you want to send me a lovely message. Lovely messages only, mind. I am on X, sort of, but I don't really use it. Now, what have I been playing recently? It's a good question. Let's find out, shall we? This next section is called What I've Been Playing Recently. Well, would you believe it? I've jumped back into Red Dead Redemption 2 again. I just love this game so much. Honestly, for me, I can't think of a better game world. The landscapes are just absolutely stunning. I can't help but try to fully immerse myself when I play, which means I've been doing a lot of hunting and camping and interacting with as many NPCs as I come across, taking on side quests to make a little extra money to line Arthur's pockets, but also to fund camp improvements and keep the gang well fed as well. For the avoidance of any main story spoilers, I just want to talk about one of the side quests I completed because I did it a little differently this time to how I played it previously. Just outside of Valentine, I came across 3 men building a new house, a father and his 2 sons, as it goes. The lads aren't the handiest in the world, as is evident when the frame they've raised falls over, almost crushing one of them. Later on, I was riding by again and saw things were kicking off. A gang of outlaws had the family pinned down under a hail of gunfire. I intervened, killing the gang and sparing Mr. House and his boys. It turns out the outlaws had been trying to extort protection money out of them, but Daddy Homestead had refused to pay. Later still, I checked in to see how things were going for the family, but the project had stalled because they needed more building supplies but had run out of funds with which to buy them. Now, when I played last time, I just loaned the man $100 and let them get on with it, but this time I offered to actually go and procure the materials on their behalf. I took a little ride out west to the Appleseed Timber Company, where I got talking to the foreman, who asked if there was anything in the way of provisions I was carrying that I could sell to him, as their provisions had been held up, and they were all at risk of starving. Well, of course, I sold what little I could afford to part with. I was, after all, looking to buy some timber off them once their logging operations were fully up and running. I couldn't very well have them starving to death then, could I? Before I left, I saw a very nasty accident in which a tree fell the wrong way, pinning a lumberjack beneath its weight and crushing both his legs. I helped shift the massive pine and get the injured labourer to safety, but the foreman said he wouldn't be able to pay the fella for a full week's work as a result. Well, I compensated the man a little, 'cause up the workers, am I right? I went back later to buy the wood I was after, but still wasn't able because of wolves. A few lumberjacks had offered themselves up as a tasty breakfast for some hungry wolves, and now the workforce had laid down their tools until the threat was dealt with. So I took care of the wolf problem and was told my order would be ready in just a few more days. A few days later I returned, exchanged $75 for a wagon load of logs, and hauled that cargo back to the man south of Valentine, who promised repayment once construction was complete and the house had been sold. So I went back a few days later and doubled my money, taking home $150. Was it worth all the trouble? Well, I got this story to tell for it, didn't I? So you tell me by writing to offrailgamer@gmail.com. I did a cheeky little stream over on YouTube close to 2 weeks ago, we had a look at PlayStation's Medieval and took on the role of Sir Daniel Fortescue's skeletal remains risen from the dead to do battle with the undead army commanded by the evil sorcerer Zarok, in an effort to secure the freedom of the kingdom of Gallowsmere. We didn't get too far into this title, but we did manage to defeat the first boss of the game, a man made out of a stained glass window. Well, we soon shattered his dreams of victory. And no, that joke was not pun intentional. Fortescue had clearly boned up on his homework. Okay, I think I'm done. Sorry about that. Anyway, Medieval isn't the scariest game going, but it does fit the aesthetic for Season of Scare, and I had a lovely time with it. Offline, I also added a game to my collection, Roller Coaster Tycoon Adventures Deluxe, and my verdict? I'd save your money if I was you. It was on a flash sale, so I did pick it up for pretty cheap, but there's no difficulty setting and the game offers nothing in the way of a challenge. Also, the game is missing the most important feature for any roller coaster stroke theme park game, allowing you to ride the rides. Honestly, you're far better off sticking with Theme Park on the PS1. That game made you feel like you were running a business, with the option to buy shares in other parks to maximise your own profits. While Roller Coaster Tycoon Adventures Deluxe does require you to invest in research to unlock new rides and restaurants, you start making money at such a rate that it just becomes another button to press, which really adds very little to the gameplay experience. The game's not broken, and you can probably lose an hour or two to it, but only if you really have nothing better to do with your day. On the whole, it's a title I'd say you're definitely best off avoiding. I played it so you don't have to. I've got some gaming news for you this week, so let's get into that, shall we? Mr. O'Dial, you may know him as Croc, is getting a remaster. Now, I'm pretty sure I covered that earlier in the year, so don't worry, that's not the news I have to share with you, although the news I do have this week is in relation to the Croc remaster, which we should be getting by the end of 2024. First up then is a story alerting us that the developers working on the Croc remaster are leaving one big thing out which featured in the original game. Now, I'm a bit fed up with just getting remaster after remaster instead of anyone bringing anything new to the table, as you know, and as such I'm not even sure that I'll be getting the Croc remaster, at least not all the while my PS1 disc is still working, touch wood and all that. But I did wonder what might be getting excluded from the remaster and whether it was something that was fine in the 90s, but a bit un-PC today. Nope, Croc the remaster will not be featuring the original tank controls. Oh, it's a kind of a nothing story. Or is it, Orgonauts? For remember back to the Tomb Raider remaster which promised new controls, but then the new controls proved to be worse than the original, so everyone opted to play with the old school tank controls. Well, by the sound of things, we won't get the option to flip between control sets this time, so let's hope Croc's new control mechanics aren't as janky as Lara's. Though Croc handled so poorly on PS1, surely they can't have made things worse. And sticking with our little reptilian friend, we also learned that the Croc remaster will be coming to Xbox, Switch, PlayStation and PC. But what's this? There's no plan to release it on Steam? I don't actually know how to go about buying PC games these days if not through Steam, so good luck to anyone who wants to play it on that platform. Though, I'd say get a console anyway, they're easier to set up, cheaper, and don't make you look like a snob. And with that, I think we can get on to something spooky now. Horror games have been around a while now, with games like Friday the 13th, on the Nintendo Entertainment System, not the online game of much more recent years. We've looked at a few terrifying titles in our Seasons of Scare over the past few years, and I figured, as our podcast falls on Halloween this year, it would make sense to talk about some of these and others that we haven't played together. Let's start then with the first video I uploaded to YouTube as the offrailgamer. The House of the Dead remake, which I played on Nintendo Switch. We had the original House of the Dead on PC when I was a nipper, and it was this, along with Time Crisis, that gave birth to my love of rail shooters. In House of the Dead, Dr. Curian has been conducting experiments at his mansion, which has risen an army of zombies. It's now your job as the player to storm in there, guns a-blazing, and putting these walking dead back in the ground. It's a rail shooter, so the game moves you, and you just have to point your gun and pull the trigger. But don't shoot everyone though, as there are a team of scientists on site, and you want to save as many of them as possible. You'll face hordes of different monstrosities as you make your way through the grounds and explore the mansion, from incredibly bitey worm-like things with a million razor-sharp teeth, to chainsaw-wielding hillbilly-looking zombies wearing plaid shirts and missing half their face. I think there are 5 boss fights in the game, but where I haven't played it in a couple of years now, I don't think I can remember them all. The first one is an armoured zombie, and you're told to aim at its weak spot. You blast the armour away and eventually reveal its heart. One of the bosses is a winged demon that flies around the roof of the mansion, and can be a bit of a pain to try and hit, if memory serves. But it's one of the final bosses that proves to be the most frustrating, as it tornadoes around the screen and throws fireballs at you. Oh, that's right. I have a feeling the final boss fight just makes you face all of these again, one after the other. I may be mistaken, but I think that's right. Anyway, House of the Dead is one of my favourite horror games, and I really need to stick it on again. Sticking with a similar aesthetic, zombies in a big old house, it makes sense to give some time to the first Resident Evil game which I played on PlayStation 1. There's been a zombie outbreak in Raccoon City, and the STARS team is looking into it. They land their helicopter in a field and are chased by zombie dogs towards a huge mansion. Once safely inside, you take control of either Leon Kennedy or Jill Valentine. Jill comes with a handgun, whereas Leon starts out with a knife, so bear that in mind when deciding who to play as. To get full completion on the game, you will need to play as both, but if you picked something up as one, it won't be available when you return to play through as the other. The voice acting in Resi is not great, but at the time added to the general creepiness. However, it did also give us some fantastic lines, like when Jill gets trapped in a room and the walls start closing in. Literally, not figuratively. It's like when Luke, Leia and Han got stuck in the garbage chute on the Death Star in A New Hope. There's no escape, and Miss Valentine is just getting ready to breathe her last when Barry, I forget his last name, kicks the door in. "Wow," he exclaims. "You were nearly a Jill sandwich." You may not believe it by today's standards, but Resident Evil was pretty gory for the time as well. When you first make your way through the dining room and take the door at the back, you get a cutscene of a zombie feasting on the bloody remains of a poor unsuspecting soul. It turns to look at you, over its shoulder, blood dripping from its jaw, eyes dead, the light gone out of them. It was enough to put you off your dinner back in the day. Now for my money, Resident Evil is still one of the greatest survival horror games, and was after all largely responsible for giving rise to the genre's huge and lasting popularity. So much so that we can come much more up to date and talk about a game from the series that is terrifying, and disgusting, and really takes the survival element of survival horror to the next level as you start out unarmed when you enter the Baker House in Resident E7. Biohazard. I say it like that because they used Roman numerals VII instead of VIL on evil. It works when you see it written down. Now, it's bold of me to talk about this game because if you go back to the Game Void YouTube channel, you'll see it was actually my co-host who played Resi 7 while I watched on in terror, but I was present for it, so I know some of what goes on. And let me tell you that it really brings the jump scare horror when Mr. Baker is chasing you around the ground floor of the house. You start out trying to put the dining table between you and he, at least long enough until you can make a dash for the door. The front door's locked, and the stairs are blocked, leaving you no option but to run down the hallway, but Baker bursts through the wall ahead of you. I think it's time for a change of trouser. I'll be but a moment. No time! Mr. Baker's chasing us still. At least he's created a bit of a circuit you can now use to dodge him as you back round the corner, run in through the dining room door and out through the newly created hole in the wall, to then leg it down the hall away from your pursuer. But what would you even be doing in a place like this? Well, at the start of the game, you see some found footage on a video camera. The protagonist's girlfriend has made a video diary, kind of explaining that it's too late for her and asking you to stay away. So we enter the Baker house to try and find and save the girl. But guess what? When we do catch up to her in the attic, she's just as crazed as the Baker family, and runs at us like some kind of crazed big cat, I think swinging at us with an axe. Though this was a fair few years ago we played over on Game Boy, so my memory is somewhat failing me. What Resident Evil 7 did was prove that, after Resi 6, they did in fact remember how to make scary games. And don't get me wrong, I don't mean to rag on Resi 6. In fact, I quite liked the fact it was essentially an action game, because it made it more accessible to a cowardy custard such as myself. But it wasn't really in keeping with the rest of the series, whereas Resi 7 got them back on track, and some. Right, let's have a breather from the seriously scary for a moment and talk about a game that runs at a much slower pace. It can be likened to Stardew Valley, primarily due to its art style, but with a much more grave aesthetic. Literally, because the game is called Graveyard Keeper. In Graveyard Keeper, the game opens on our central character, who seems a pretty ordinary man. He gets knocked down in a vehicular hit-and-run accident, and when he comes to, he finds himself somewhere altogether very different. Everything looks kinda early medieval. It's explained to you that you are the new Graveyard Keeper in this place. Like Stardew Valley, there are many mysteries to solve by helping NPCs around town or completing various quests to gain access to different parts of the map that you will need to obtain things to help the NPCs I mentioned just now. But don't forget, you do have a job to do while you're here. You must tidy up the graveyard so that you can bury more corpses in it. Oh, but some folks live bad lives and don't deserve to be buried on consecrated grounds, so you can either bury them in the woods, or later in the game, cremate their remains. To meet certain goals, you see, your graveyard must be deemed up to scratch, and is scored on the bodies buried therein and the overall upkeep of the place. It's not good enough to simply put the bodies in the ground. You must upgrade your workbench so that you can craft headstones and borders for each grave as well. I think from memory, these will wear over time, so you must maintain them or be prepared to replace them, all at cost to your limited resource stockpile. Graveyard Keeper is grim, but offers a much more chilled gaming experience for the spookiest month of the year. Saying that, it is more challenging than Stardew Valley, to which I compared it earlier. The fishing minigame in particular is very difficult to get the hang of. As you know, I'm a massive fan of the Red Dead Redemption games, and so I'm sure you knew that I was going to have to talk about a game that I played through in our very first season of Scare, Undead Nightmare. One stormy night, John Marston is woken by a crashing noise coming from Jack's bedroom. Uncle's gone crazy and has bitten Abigail. You get to do what we all wanted to during the final missions of the game and put Uncle down with a bullet to his brain. But unlike Ricky Martin, we're far from living La Vida Loco, and must now hogtie John's infected wife and son before they take him for a Dairily Lunchable and start munching on him. John rides into the nearest town, Blackwater, in hopes of finding a cure for whatever strange ailment has afflicted his family. Unfortunately, he finds it's more widespread than his ranch at Beecher's Hope. It seems the whole world has been plagued by a zombie uprising. John will travel the length of West Elizabeth and New Austin searching for a cure. Along the way, he'll gun down zombie hordes climbing out of the ground in church cemeteries, and he'll also meet some familiar faces from the main game, most notably Seth, who has one zombie playing the fiddle for him while he dances the night away with another. Undead Nightmare really does bring the creep, and the early 20th century end of the Wild West is an amazing setting for such a theme. Eventually, John's inquiries will take him south of the border down Mexico way. I can't remember if it was Seth's doing, but essentially someone had gone grave robbing from an old Aztec temple. Returning the stolen artifact to its intended resting place underground restores the world above to normality. Of course, you'll have to shoot your way in through one last zombie horde to be able to put that thing back where it came from, or so help me. If you want to learn more about John's Undead Nightmare, go pay my YouTube channel a visit after the podcast and check out the playlist I saved. Here's a game that is a horror, but I reckon safe for babies like me to play. Until Dawn. It's effectively a playable movie about some annoying teens going to a log cabin retreat in the mountains for to have a party. The game's outcome is dictated by the decisions you make along the way, which affects the game's branching storyline and determines who lives and who, well, doesn't live. I understand you can achieve a good ending in which everyone dies, and a bad ending where they all survive. These are some very annoying teens. Or there are a bunch of other outcomes where only some of the party meet their timely demise. Anyway, I haven't played Until Dawn myself yet. I just watched Jacksepticeye play it years ago before I lost interest in his channel. A game I have played, on the other hand, is Limbo. This is a fairly simplistic game in which you play as a little boy running from the left side of the screen to the right. Sometimes you'll need to jump, and other times you'll need to interact with objects to solve puzzles. The game is all in black and white and uses the shadows to great effect to intensify the suspense and horror. Limbo does also manage to bring the scare and increase the old heart rate, especially early on when you're being chased by a huge spider. This thing's like 3 times the size of the little boy. I'm not being dramatic. I think you end up pulling its legs off at some point, or else it gets crushed by a boulder or something. Anyway, it's creepy enough to make your skin crawl if you're at all arachnophobic. I also hate the thought of being pursued, so the game really doubled down for me. You'll encounter other people in Limbo, but they're definitely not on your side as they fire bow and arrows and blow darts at you. Thankfully, they're not too bright, and you can lure them into their own booby traps to get rid of them. What's worse, though, is the brain worms that drop from the ceiling, infect your mind, and seize control of your body. The key to dealing with them is to step into the light. They don't like that, and will vacate your skull cavity post-haste. Although the game graphics are fairly basic, Limbo still does things that will turn your stomach. It's not a very long game and will only take a few hours to complete, but honestly, Limbo is a great little game and I would highly recommend you add it to your season of Scare Play schedule if you've not tried it yet. But that's pretty much all from me for now, except for one final bit of gaming news that came in just before I sat down to record this episode. If you have a Nintendo Switch Online account, you can download the Nintendo Music app on your smartphone or smart device. It's effectively Spotify, but for Nintendo game soundtracks. And now that I brought that to your attention, I will take my leave of you and be an elf. Bye!